The archive smelled of cold stone and old data, and HFY had learned, after 11 years as its keeper, that it always would. He stood at the entrance to Hall 7 on the morning the new contract worker arrived and watched her cross the threshold with a single cloth bag and the expression of someone who had just been handed a sentence without hearing the charge. She was young, 22. Her intake file said, human, refugee class, processed through the Trade Exchange Labor Registry that morning. 7 years of contracted service in exchange for legal residency status and full citizenship upon completion. The standard arrangement. Kessa Vane, he said. Yes, she said. Restoration Division, Hall 7, Sublevel 3. The work is indexing and cross-referencing the Compact's pre-unification military records. Most has never been digitized. Some is physically damaged. He handed her the intake sheet. You'll be under Supervisor Bren Oskett for the first 6 months, then reviewed. She had dark eyes and a very still face, the kind of stillness that could be either calm or controlled fear. He had spent enough years doing intake assessments to know he could not tell which yet. Any questions? He said. She had one. How complete are the records? It was not the question new laborers usually asked. They asked about quarters, meal rotations, the 6-month review. Incomplete, he said. The Unification War records were never fully centralized. A significant portion of casualty lists, unit rosters and field dispatches were flagged for restoration and then deprioritized. Deprioritized, she said, in the tone of someone writing it down somewhere behind her eyes. He handed her the access badge, Sublevel 3 at the 7th hour. She went. He did not think about her again for 3 months. The first review came at the 6-month mark, and Supervisor Bren Oskett filed it with one additional notation. Worker produces above standard cross-referencing output. Queries flag unclear, requesting clarification on scope of restoration mandate. Dresch pulled the query log. 14 internal queries in 6 months. 11 were standard, 3 were not. The 3 non-standard queries asked, in precise administrative language, whether the restoration mandate applied to records that had been misfiled rather than simply undocumented, whether correcting erroneous entries fell within her scope, or only the digitization of unprocessed physical material. He walked to Sublevel 3. Kessa Vane was at Station 9 and did not see him come in. She was bent over a physical ledger from the Veth corridor conflict, one hand holding the spine open, the other moving an optical reader along a column of names. She was murmuring something, not to anyone, just the low, steady sound a person makes when they are counting. The screen at her station showed a split display. On the left, the physical ledger page. On the right, the existing digital record for the same unit. The 2 columns of names did not match. The physical ledger had 41 names. The digital record had 38. 3 missing, he said. She startled, turned, and her expression went through several things before settling back into that still surface. Overseer Vol. The digital record has 38 names. The physical ledger has 41. Yes, the 3 missing entries were filed under the wrong unit designation in the original digitization. A clerical transposition, 1 digit wrong in the unit code. The records exist, but they are invisible to any search for this unit. The soldiers would never appear in the casualty lists for their actual unit of service. He looked at the screen. How did you find this? Cross-referencing the physical ledgers against the digital records. There are discrepancies in approximately 8% of the Veth corridor files I have reviewed. Your mandate is digitization of unprocessed material. I know, she met his eyes steadily. That is why I filed the queries. I was not sure if correcting the errors was inside my scope. No one answered. He had not answered because he had not noticed. He looked at the split screen again, 38 names on one side, 41 on the other. 3 soldiers misfiled into the wrong drawer, invisible for 60 years. Continue the cross-referencing, he said. Document each discrepancy in a separate correction log. I will authorize the expanded scope. She nodded once, like someone receiving a sentence they had already expected. He left and thought about the look on her face for a long time and could not decide what it meant. Year 2 brought a different quality of silence. Dresch noticed it the way you noticed a sound that had stopped, not in the moment it stopped, but 3 beats later. The correction log she had been authorized to maintain had grown to 417 entries in 14 months. He reviewed it on a Thursday morning and found he could not stop reading. The entries were precise and dry, each one identifying the source of the misfilling, the correct unit designation, the names affected, and the recommended correction. But they accumulated. 417 soldiers, invisible in the archive, now visible. Families who had been told there was no record, the archive's standard language for a dead end, would find if they searched again, that the record now existed and was correct. He ran the projection. If the error rate held across the full pre-unification military archive, all 37 campaigns, all 1,400 unit designations, the correction log would eventually contain between 20 and 30,000 entries. He sat with that number for a while. He pulled her personnel file. Refugee intake, secondary schooling completed, no tertiary credentials, no archival training, no history certification. The methodology in her correction log was consistent and careful in the way people became methodical when they had taught themselves by doing it. He drafted a commendation notice twice. Both times he deleted it. Something about the work felt private, like watching someone repair something in a room they thought was empty and finding you could not interrupt. He filed the correction log in the priority review queue and said nothing. In the 3rd year, Dresch received a formal inquiry from the Memorial Affairs Office. A Thari family, 3 surviving children of a soldier listed as unrecorded in the Veth Corridor campaign, had resubmitted a memorial status application that had been denied twice. The current application had been accepted. The family wanted to know what had changed. He answered the inquiry and then sat for a while looking at the name. Sergeant Prenvale, 14th Forward Unit, Veth Corridor 3rd Campaign. Died in the 2nd month of the siege. Now correctly filed. 3 adult children who had been trying for 31 years. He went to sublevel 3 at the 5th hour before the shift began. She was the only one there. She was at Station 4, the far end of the hall, with a ledger open and a digitization scanner beside her. She did not hear him come in. She had a paper notebook beside the scanner. Paper costs something, and she was writing in it by hand between entries, in tiny precise script. Sergeant Prenvale's family received their memorial status, he said. She turned. Good, she said, just that. His children had been trying since the 1st year of the memorial program, 31 years. Something moved through her face and was gone, like a light briefly turned on. I know, she said. He looked at the notebook. What are you writing? Notes on the pattern of errors. Most of the misfilling is not random. The same transposition patterns occur across the same time periods. If I map them, I can search for errors directly instead of cross-referencing line by line. It is faster. He looked at the station, the scanner, the paper notebook. At your current rate, how long until the Veth Corridor files are fully corrected? 8 months on the current scope. 4 if I can use the pattern search methodology. I will authorize the pattern search methodology, he said. Something in her shoulders shifted, barely perceptible, the small physical release of a door opening that had been closed a long time. He left. He did not sleep well that night, thinking about the notebook and the 40 extra minutes she arrived before the shift and stayed after, without a single overtime claim in 2 years. About what kind of person spent their own money on paper to map error patterns that were nowhere in their contract. He was starting to think he had not understood what she was measuring at the intake threshold on the first day. Year 4 arrived and the correction log reached 3,000 entries. The Memorial Affairs Office sent a formal commendation letter to the Archives Records Division. Dresch put a copy on Kessa Vane station without a word. He came back an hour later. It was face down. He turned it over. She was at a different row, her back to him. "Did you read it?" he said. "Yes. It is a commendation." "I know. Most workers would find that useful at a review. I am not doing it for reviews." He waited. In the next row, a scanner made its soft cycling sound. Dust moved in the overhead light. Why then? He had not meant to ask. The question came out anyway. She was quiet long enough that he thought she would not answer. Then she turned. She was holding a ledger, older than most in this section, the binding cracked along the spine. She held it the way people held things that had cost them something. "My father served in the Keth campaign," she said. "The Keth withdrawal second year. When he applied for residency, they told him his service record did not appear in the archive. He applied 3 times. He was denied 3 times. She looked at the ledger. "He died 4 years before I came here, still unverified." Dresch said nothing. "I will not reach the Keth campaign files for another year at the current rate, but I know the error patterns now." She met his eyes. "I am doing it for the same reason the Veth corridor soldiers' families deserve to find the record. And I am doing it for him. And because someone should have done this before I was born, and if I can fix it while I am here, I will." She set the ledger down and turned back to her work. Dresch stood in the archive with the commendation letter in his hand and felt something he had not expected. Shame. Not at her. At the archive. At himself. For the 4 years he had spent watching this young woman quietly rebuild what the institution should have built, unasked, uncompensated, in the extra minutes at either end of every day. He went back to his office and pulled the staffing code and began reading. The 5th year, 8th month. Dresch Vol filed a formal petition with the Compact's labor registry. The petition cited the correction log, now at 6,214 entries, and Kessa Vane's unsolicited development of pattern search methodology that had reduced systematic error identification time by 63%. It cited the Memorial Affairs commendation. It cited the 3 formal thank you letters from families, which Kessa had never submitted to her own personnel file, and which Dresch had found only by going looking. And it cited the legal provision, rarely invoked, by which contracted service could be credited at an accelerated rate when a worker's contributions demonstrably exceeded contracted scope. He submitted the petition and did not tell her. He told himself the outcome was uncertain and raising expectations was unkind. The other part was that he was not sure he could explain why it had taken him 4 years to look. The petition was approved 6 weeks later. He called her to his office on a Tuesday morning, the archive cold, thin winter light through the upper windows. She came in and sat across from him with the same still expression she had carried through every one of their conversations, the one he had spent 4 years mistaking for blankness. He slid the document across the desk. He watched her read it. He watched her reach the determination, credited service equivalent to 6 years, 10 months, residency status effective immediately, citizenship processing initiated, contract discharged. She stopped reading. She sat very still. "The Keth campaign files," he said. "I've assigned 2 additional workers to that section under your direction. They will continue the work. The correction log will reach completion whether or not you are the one holding the scanner." Her face did something then that it had never done in 4 years of conversations. The controlled surface releasing into something that was not quite grief and not quite relief, but was probably both, compressed into 3 seconds before she brought it back. "He's in there," she said quietly. "My father. I found his unit designation last month. The error was a single-letter transposition in the campaign identifier. Keth filed as Kath in 40% of the relevant records. His service record exists. It has just been invisible. She set the document down carefully. I corrected it 2 weeks ago. Dresch was still for a moment. Then it will be found, he said. She nodded. She picked up the document and held it with the same care she gave the old ledgers, the ones whose spines had cracked and whose corners had been crushed by time. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He looked at this young woman who had arrived with a cloth bag and a sentence she had not been given a charge for, and who had spent 5 years making the invisible visible again, one name at a time, in the 40 extra minutes at either end of every day. "No," he said, and meant it. "Thank you." She stood and crossed the office and walked back out through the archive hall, past the rows of shelving and the scanning stations, past the ledgers from the Veth corridor and the Keth campaign and all the unnamed campaigns between, and through the door into the winter light. Dresch sat at his desk for a long time afterward, looking at the space where she had been. Then he opened the staffing roster, added 2 names to the Keth campaign restoration team, and got back to work.